Aishwarya, and in our class today we are going to be looking at the chapter How Do Organisms Reproduce. We're going to be having a quick chapter summary in under 45 minutes. So I hope all of you are excited for today's class. I do know that we started a little bit late. There was about 5 to 8 minutes delay, so I'm very sorry about that. But everyone, please make sure that all of you are excited, all of you have your notebooks with you, and make sure you have your textbooks because we are going to be revising the whole chapter in just under 45 minutes. Now I can see that a lot of you are here already. Hi Ritu, hi Khushi, hi Ushna, Mohammad. I can see Ashwini, Meghna, Jisman, Janshi, I can see Vignesh, a lot of you are here. Good evening everybody, good evening. So I know that a lot of you are excited for this class and I know a lot of you wanted this class as well, which is why we here at Byju's bring whatever that is necessary for the class, right? So everybody very quickly make sure that you like this video. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel because Byju's 9 and 10 has gotten super serious about your board examination prep and we are constantly going to revise all of your science chapters so that you get the best from our channel, right? So everybody, let's quickly aim for having 100 likes on this video by the end of 45 minutes. Yes, and please let me know if my audio, my video and my screen and what I'm writing on the screen is visible to all of you. If it is, please do give me a quick thumbs up. Everybody, give me a quick thumbs up. Yes, and make sure that you share this video with all of your friends because this will help you out. And the PYQs, the previous year questions for this particular chapter will be done today at 7 p.m. by Ankita ma'am. So what you can do is you will have a chapter summary, then PYQs will be done today itself. So make sure that in your calendar you say I'm going to complete my preparation for How Do Organisms chapter because end to end will be done today only. Yes. So before I get started, everybody, can I please have an increase in the font size, Shiva, so that I can see the comments? So everybody, as you all know, today is going to be a chapter under 45 minutes. There's going to be no Menti quiz, but rather I'm going to quickly recall some of the concepts, right? So there are a few things that I need from all of you. Okay, so these are some basic things that I would require. So first and foremost, I hope all of you have your notebooks and pens with you. If you do, give me a quick yes on the chat saying that yes ma'am, I have everything with us, right? So give me a yes for that. Second thing is, because today, as you know, that this is a huge chapter and we need to look at all the concepts, I need you to pay attention to me, okay? And keep writing all the important pointers as I discuss, okay? Now, I will not be able to cater to your doubts in between the session, okay? Because we have only 45 minutes to cover this huge chapter, yes? So, I'll not be taking doubts mid-session, but towards the end, I have a doubt board session where before 6 p.m., how many doubts I'm able to take it, I will take that. And whatever doubts I miss out now, don't worry about it because later today at 7 p.m., Ankita will come again and she will give you complete conceptual clarity. So, like I said, both of us together are going to help you out with this chapter today. So, I'm not going to spend more time. I'm going to get started very quickly. Now here's a quick reminder that if you have not yet subscribed to our channel, it is high time that you subscribe because Byju's 9 and 10 has gotten super serious with your exam, right? We here, all teachers, believe that all of our students who watch our videos must be able to score at least 95% in the respective subjects and collectively, right? So this is what we are aiming for and we have lots of series coming your way. We have pre-board fest coming in very soon as well for all of you. So what are you waiting for? If you still have not subscribed, then you know, right, that you are going to be missing out, which is why everybody do not forget to subscribe, especially my new students who might be watching my video for the first time. Quickly go ahead and subscribe to the channel, right? So let's get started, everybody. Now, these are the things to remember for today's class, right? So what are the broad key topics we are going to cover? So we're going to be talking about reproduction. We're going to be talking about types of reproduction, types of asexual reproduction, sexual reproduction in flowering plants, fertilization and double fertilization. Then we're going to talk about sexual reproduction in human beings, male and female reproductive system, and reproductive health and contraceptives, okay? So these are the broad topics that we are going to be covering. So let's get started with understanding what is reproduction, right? So we know that reproduction can be simply defined as the process by which living organisms make young ones of their own kind, right? So this is how we define reproduction. Now, when we talk about reproduction or why reproduction is necessary, we know that this is necessary for the survival of the species, right? Or we can say that this is necessary for the continuity of the species, right? So this is necessary for the continuity of species. Now, more often than not, we know that reproduction takes place by the process of DNA copying, right? And we know that DNA copying is nothing but a mechanism where a copy of the DNA is made so that it can be transferred to the next one. And why is reproduction necessary? What are the advantages is what I have written. It enables the survival of the species and allows for the continuity of generations, continuity of species, generation after generation. Now, when we talk about the different kinds, right, or we talk about the different modes of reproduction, we have asexual mode of reproduction and we have sexual mode of reproduction. Now, when we talk about asexual mode of reproduction, some key pointers are necessary to remember. So, first and foremost, in asexual reproduction, we see that only one single parent is involved, and we see that there are no reproductive cells or gametes involved, right? So we see that there are no reproductive cells or gametes, and we see that there is no process. We see that there is no process of fusion of gametes, and along with that we see that there are no variation, right? So we see that there are no variations. Now, what are variations for all those of you who might ask me? So variations are nothing but slight differences that we observe between parent and offspring, right? So we see that these are the slight differences that we observe. Now here, because only one parent is involved, we see that the offspring that is produced, right? So offspring that is produced is identical. So I'll say offspring is almost identical to the parent, okay? This is something that you need to know. Very, very important pointer. Yes? So when you talk about asexual reproduction, or if you get a question on asexual reproduction, these are all the important pointers that you need to write. You can take a screenshot of this right now, or I'll be sharing this with you on Telegram, so this will definitely come handy for all of you, right? So when they ask about reproduction, what are the points that you need to incorporate? 2 points. If you get it for 2 marks, just write definition and the advantages, right? Then if they ask you about asexual reproduction for more than 3 marks, write everything that I have shown on screen. Very good. So now let's move on to understanding a little bit more on asexual reproduction and talk about the different types of asexual reproduction. Now, asexual reproduction is where one parent is involved, and most often than not we see asexual reproduction in most unicellular organisms and in some simple multicellular organisms, right? So the first one that we are going to talk about is fission. So very quickly everybody, what do you remember about fission? In the chat, very quickly, what is it that you remember about fission? So when we talk about fission as well, we learn it specifically as binary fission, right? So we know that binary fission is nothing but the process wherein a single parent, yes, very good everyone, very good. A single parent will split into giving 2 offsprings or 2 daughter cells, right? So that is what we call as fission. Yes, it can also be defined as the splitting of cells, right? So now the definition that I have written, where a single parent will split in giving rise to 2 offsprings, is what we call as binary fission. But we also know that fission is of 2 kinds, right? So we know that fission is binary or it could be multiple. Yes, so in binary fission, we see that 2 offsprings are there. But in multiple fission, we know that the parent that is there, the nucleus will split into many nuclei and then it will be enclosed, right? So they'll be enclosed in some cytoplasm and overall in a cyst. And eventually when conditions are favorable, they will release. Yes? So in this case, multiple fission is when there are many offsprings. Now in binary fission, we know that the most common example we can take are amoeba and leishmania. Yes, while on the other hand, when we talk about multiple fission, we can take the example of plasmodium. So you need to remember the examples as well. So now let's move on to fragmentation. Right, so when we talk about fragmentation, we know that fragmentation is a process wherein we see that a single parent, right? So let me use another color. So fragmentation is when a single parent will be broken down, all right, or will be, I would say, will split into fragments, right? That is the key word here. They will split into fragments, and we see that each fragment will give rise to a new organism. And can you quickly tell me an example of an organism that undergoes fragmentation? Yes, I'm seeing the answers. Khyati has told me. It is Spirogyra, which is a green algae that we observe. So here when you're writing about fragmentation or you get questions on fragmentation, this part, right, that parent will split into fragments or they will split into certain pieces, and each piece, okay, each piece will become into a new organism. Yes, very good. Now let's move on to the next one, which is regeneration. And on an examination front, this is a very, what do you say, important question, right? Because when you talk about regeneration and fragmentation, they will ask you this question, okay? What is the difference between fragmentation and regeneration? Now, first and foremost, regeneration is not an ideally a way of reproduction that we observe, but during some unfavorable conditions, right? So we see that during unfavorable conditions, we see that some organisms like Hydra or maybe Planaria, they may lose a part of their body. And there are certain specific cells which have the ability to regenerate and give rise to a new part, which is what we call as regeneration. It is almost like repair. Very good, Vinay, very good. It's kind of like repair. So Planaria, Hydra, starfishes, even our livers, they show the ability to regenerate. But most often than not, we cannot say that regeneration is a mode of reproduction. But I would say during unfavorable conditions, this is something that the organism will resort to in order to stay alive, right? So when you are writing the difference between fragmentation and regeneration, remember this. Exactly, they have regenerative cells, right? That is something to remember. Next up, we have budding. Now, budding is seen in two organisms, right? So we observe budding in organisms like Hydra and yeast. Yes, and we see that in this case, in the case of budding, we see that there is a small outgrowth or a protrusion. What is a protrusion? It's nothing but an outgrowth, right? And this outgrowth that is there is what we call as a bud. And this bud will undergo maturation, and eventually in the case of Hydra, tentacle formation is observed, and towards the end, the bud will detach from the parent, becoming a new organism. So that is what we understand in budding. Then of course we have spore formation. So spore formation is something that we observe in organisms like fungi. And here I will specify that it is the multicellular fungi like Rhizopus, right? Now in this case, we know that in the case of spore formation, we see that there are these thread-like structures in the fungi known as mycelia, right? And we know that some of them, thread-like structures known as hyphae, and many hyphae form the mycelium. And we know that they have these bulged balloon-like structures that are there, which are called as the sporangia, right? Or this is what we call as the sporangium. So it's like a balloon-like structure. Now inside this, of course, they have many tiny structures known as spores. And normally what happens is that when the fungi are mature, the sporangia will burst, the spores will come out and they will fall. And if the conditions are ideal or suitable for growth, they will grow into new organisms. So that is what we mean by spore formation. Yes, trendy cuisine, I'll write that towards the end of the class today. Okay, towards the end, just remind me, I will write it for you. But everybody, are we clear with asexual reproduction? Are we clear with fission, fragmentation, regeneration, budding and spore formation? Are we good to go? Yes, good. Now let's quickly move on to the next one, right? So we're going to look at asexual reproduction in plants. Yes. So we know that in asexual reproduction in plants, we mainly call it as vegetative propagation, right? So what do we mean by vegetative propagation? So in the meanwhile, you can also give me the answer in the chat, right? So vegetative propagation is nothing but using the vegetative parts of the plant. So when vegetative parts of the plant are involved in reproduction, we call it as vegetative propagation. And what are your vegetative parts? They include your root, stem and leaf, right? Now normally in the case of root, we know that sweet potato is an example. Now sweet potato have a modified root wherein if I take that and I put it in soil, it will give rise to a new plant. And on the surface of the sweet potato, we have these bud-like structures that give rise to a new plant. Now in the case of stem, you can write the example of the normal potato. You can give the example of ginger. They are all examples of modified stem, right? Then of course we have leaves as well. Now the leaf, of course, the most common example is bryophyllum, which happens naturally. Now what are the advantages that are there? What are the advantages of vegetative propagation? Now in this case, of course, we see that more number of offsprings can be produced, right? Identical offsprings can be produced. Now this is both advantages as well as disadvantages, because if you are able to produce identical offspring, if you have some desirable character, then you can retain it throughout. But at the same time, if there's some undesirable character, like for example, the plant is easily susceptible to some disease, or the plant will not be very tall, or the plant will not give you many fruits, then that is a disadvantageous character, right? So that is something that is there. And yes, Saroj, less time is taken for it as well. And there are lesser number of variations, precisely. So these are some advantages. Now, these are natural ways. When I take the whole potato and I just keep it and I get a new plant, right? But at the same time, if you see, when you look at artificial, we have methods like grafting, stem cutting, layering, tissue culture, where of course there is involvement of humans. So in grafting, we take two different stems, we bring it together, the stalk and the scion, and we tie it together and we give rise to a new organism. In stem cutting, we take a piece of the stem which has a node in it and we put it in a new plant, something we observe in roses. Then we have layering, where we normally take a piece of the stem, put it under the soil, tie it so that we get a new organism, right? And of course in tissue culture, this is something that is done in the laboratories, right? Where in an artificial medium, we are able to cultivate a new organism. So this is very, very important. And yes, it's important to remember rows for stem cutting. So yes. Now Vidisha, don't worry, I'll not be able to explain it in detail if I am not able to give the clarity in this session. You can ask Ankita ma'am, nothing to worry about. And everybody, here's a quick reminder, I will be taking doubts only towards the end of the class, not mid explanation. So I just need all of you to pay attention, okay? So we are clear with asexual reproduction, right? Everybody, quick thumbs up. Quick thumbs up that asexual reproduction is good to go. Now I'm moving on to sexual reproduction, okay? And like I told you, I'm going to finish the explanation and only then take doubts. So in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to wind this up. Very simple and easy. Amazing. So now we are going to move on to sexual reproduction, okay? Now in sexual reproduction, and you can tell me the points in the chat as well. So sexual reproduction may what happens? We know that first and foremost, we know that two parents are involved, right? So we know that there is two parents which are involved, where there is a male and there is a female which is involved. Now we know that in this case, both males and females, when I say they are involved, how are they getting involved? They are involved by producing certain reproductive cells. So they produce reproductive cells or gametes. So in this case, gametes are present. And we know that fusion of gametes take place. So now when fusion of gametes take place, right, there is mixing of genetic material. And when mixing takes place, or when there's a lot of genetic material coming into the picture, where there's a lot of, differences that are coming, we know that there is variation, right? So variation is present. And I've already told you what is variation. Yes, and we know that as a result, the offspring is not identical to the parent, right? Offspring is not identical to parent, but offspring has certain similarities with the parent, right? So you can say that similarity. So there are two ways of writing the last point. Offsprings are not identical to the parent, or you can write down saying offsprings have some similarities towards the parent. Now in our chapter, we looked at sexual reproduction both in plants as well as in humans. So first, quickly, we are going to have a look at sexual reproduction in plants. Now in plants, especially in flowering plants, right, we see that sexual reproduction takes place where the reproductive organ, so we see that the reproductive organ is the flower, right? And why do we call this as the reproductive organ? Because it bears the male reproductive part and the female reproductive part. Now the male reproductive part is the stamen, right? So we see that it is the stamen, and we see that the stamen has two parts. So let me use another slide. So this is the male reproductive part here, which I am drawing as the stamen. And this is the structure. Now this right here is the anther. And this right here is the filament. Now the anther is a bilobed structure, as you see. And inside it, we see that there are structures known as pollen sacs, inside which they produce fine powdery substances known as pollen grains. And inside the pollen grains, we find the male gamete. Okay, I'm going to write this on top to make some space. So we find the male gamete here. Now on the other hand, when we talk about the female reproductive part, right? So we know that the female reproductive part that is there is nothing but the pistil. Yes? So this right here is the pistil. Now the pistil has a top knob-like structure known as stigma, which receives the pollen grain. Then we have a long tubular structure known as style. And then of course we have the swollen base-like structure that is there, which is called as the ovary, right? And last, inside we have the ovules. So this is the ovule and this is the ovary. And inside the ovule we will find the female gamete. So now we know about the important parts, right? And it's important that you remember that this is the stamen, which is the male reproductive part, and this is the pistil, which is the female reproductive part. Yes? Now we also know that pollen is, which has the male gamete, is inside, right? Pollen here that is there is inside the anther, and your female gamete is in the ovule. So how exactly is it reaching? So that is where you need to understand another very important concept, which is pollination, right? So what is pollination? Very simple and easy. So pollination is nothing but the transfer of pollen from anther to stigma. So that is what we call as pollination, right? And we know that there are two kinds of pollination, where we have self-pollination and we have cross-pollination. Yes? So now in self-pollination, transfer of pollen happens from anther to stigma. So I'll write the keyword here, that is anther to stigma, right? So for self-pollination, it can happen within the same flower, or it can happen between two different flowers, right? So it can happen between two different flowers but of the same plant, right? So if I'll draw the pistil here only, it can happen between two different flowers but of the same plant. While in the case of cross-pollination, what we observe is that transfer of pollen takes place from anther to stigma of two different flowers but of the same kind, right? So two different flowers of two different plants but of the same species. So this is what we understand as self-pollination and cross-pollination. And we see that there are various agents which are involved for self and cross-pollination. Now once pollination takes place, we know that the pollen will land on the stigma, right? So let me quickly draw that so that you remember it. So we know that once it reaches here, we know that the pollen will land on the surface of the stigma. It will form a pollen tube. It will grow downwards, carrying the male gametes, and it will reach the ovary. Now inside the ovary, we see that there is an embryo sac. And here we see that there is the egg cell here. So inside the embryo sac, if I were to draw it, we know that this is the egg cell, which is the female gamete, and we have something known as the central cell or the polar nuclei. Now in the pollen, there are two male gametes, right? So we see that there are two male gametes which take place. Now we observe that one male gamete, right? So one male gamete will fuse with the egg cell, resulting in the formation of a zygote. And this process of fusion of male and female gametes resulting in the formation of zygote. Write this down as I am dictating it to you. The fusion of male and female gamete resulting in the form of zygote is called as fertilization, right? So this is what we understand, and this is something we observe in humans also. But in the case of plants, right, what happens? We also know that there is one more male gamete, right? So we know that there is the second male gamete, one more male gamete. So that will fuse with the polar nuclei. And in the polar nuclei, we know that there are two of them. Yes? So when they fuse, they will give rise to something known as PEN. How many of you know what is PEN? I have taught this to you before. Yes, how many of you remember PEN? In the chat. Quickly, what does PEN stand for? When it fuses with the polar nuclei, which is also known as, you know, the secondary nucleus. Yes? What is it known as? Very good, very good. It is known as the primary endosperm nucleus, right? So this is what we call as PEN, and this is what eventually develops into the endosperm. Okay, so now this is what we call, and here now what has happened? Here fusion has happened twice, or fertilization has taken twice, right? The fusion has taken place 2 times, which is why we call this process as double fertilization. Are we clear with whatever we have discussed so far? Are we clear, everybody, or have we gotten distracted in the chat? Yes, are we clear? Give me a quick thumbs up. Yes, everyone. Very good. Ma'am, will pen come in exam? No, most likely they'll not come. They'll just maybe ask you to explain it, explain what it is. So we know that in the pollen grain there are 2 nuclei, right? Or there are 2 male gametes. One male gamete will fuse with egg cell giving zygote. Second male gamete will fuse with polar nuclei to give pen. And eventually it will result in the formation of primary endosperm nucleus. This is called as double fertilization. Yes, double fertilization is there for you, but pen will not come for you in exam. Okay, don't worry about it. So now what have we observed? We know that after pollination, right? So from pollination, we know that there is pollen tube formation resulting in fertilization. Now these are all events which lead up to fertilization, right? Now after fertilization, we see that all the other parts, right? So we see that all the other parts of the plant, like, you know, all the other parts of the plant like sepal, petal, your stamens, style, stigma, all of them will wither off, leaving us only with ovary and ovule. Yes? So we see that there is ovary and fertilized ovule. So now fertilization has taken place, so we call it as fertilized ovule. Now the ovary will ripen to form the fruit, and here in the ovule will develop to form the seed, right? So this is something that you need to remember. So if they ask you what are the post-fertilization events, then post-fertilization events include ovary ripening to form fruit, ovule or fertilized ovule that is there, it will develop to form the seed. So this was all about sexual reproduction in plants. Now very quickly I will move ahead to sexual reproduction in animals, and then towards the end I will take your doubts, Vinay. So towards the end that is there, I will take it, right? Ma'am, 10 more minutes, don't worry, we can stretch it up to 15 more minutes, so don't worry about it. So now let's talk about sexual reproduction in humans, right? So when we talk about sexual reproduction in humans, we need to quickly recall our basics on learning about the phase of adolescence, right? Because we know that adolescence that is there is a transitional state, right? So we see that it is a transition state between childhood and adulthood, right? And we know that this is the space, or this is the time of life when the person attains sexual maturity. Yes, so during childhood an individual is not really capable of reproduction, but once the individual hits puberty, the body starts to undergo various changes, wherein eventually by the time adolescence is over, the individual would have attained sexual maturity or would have the ability to reproduce. So what are some of the changes that we observe? Now we of course observe changes in girls as well as boys. Now, of course, I'm not going to go too much in detail because this is some of our basics. But when we talk about changes in girls, we know that there is change in body shape, right? Wherein there is widening of the hip region, such that, at the end of the day, the development of the young one happens within the female. So we have change in body shape. Then we also observe change in voice, right? So I'm just going to write change in voice. There is increased activity of sweat and sebaceous gland. Then there is development of the reproductive organs. So we observe development of reproductive organs. Then we have enlargement of breasts or mammary glands, right? Along with that, we also have hormonal changes. Very good. Now, in the case of boys, again, we observe physical changes such as change in body shape, wherein there are broad shoulders. So we see that there are broad shoulders and they become more muscular. And along with that, we see that there is change in voice, which becomes deeper and hoarse. And of course, there's development of reproductive organs, but there is development of facial hair, chest hair, right? So this is something we observe in boys. But common that is there to do is that development of pubic hair, armpit hair, all of that is very common in both boys as well as girls. But now the most important thing that we need to focus on is the development of reproductive organs, right? Which means that during adolescence or once puberty hits, the reproductive systems will start to develop. So what is this reproductive system? So reproductive system is the part of the body which have different organs that come together and facilitate in the production of reproductive cells or gametes and facilitate the process of reproduction, right? So we have the male reproductive system. Now in males we have the male reproductive system where the main reproductive organ are the testes. Right? So we know that the testes are a pair of them, right? So in singular we write it as testis, or if I do it with E, so T-S-T-E-S, that is the plural, okay? So here we know that testes are the main reproductive organ. And why am I saying that they are the main reproductive organ? Because they are responsible for producing the male gamete, which is the sperm, right? So they are responsible for the production of sperms. Now we see that sperms are produced inside the testes. Now the testes are located outside the male body, okay? It's what we also call it as extra abdominal, right? So we call it as extra abdominal because it is not inside the body, but rather it is outside the body and it is protected by a flap of, protected by a sac of skin-like structure called as scrotum. Now the reason why it is located outside the body is because sperm production requires a temperature which is about a few degrees, about 2 to 3 degrees lower than our body temperature, right? Which is why it is located outside the body. Now we see that there are a pair of testes, and once the sperms are produced, it is then sent to the next part, which is the epididymis. Now in the epididymis, the sperms are stored briefly, and then through the next part, which is the sperm duct or the vas deferens, it is taken over to the next part. Now on the way, it receives secretions from various accessory glands like the seminal vesicle, the prostate gland, the bulbourethral gland, and then we see that it will eventually form semen. Right? And from here it will then join with the urethra, and of course the urethra will enter into the male external genitalia, which is called as the penis. And through the penis, of course, is how the semen is released. So in your exam, they can ask you for the pathway of sperm. Okay. So if they ask you for this, you need to start with testis. Then from here it goes to the epididymis. Right, from the epididymis, it then goes into the vas deferens, or you can say sperm duct. Right, so from the sperm duct, it then joins into the urethra. Right, and here on the way, yes, it receives secretion from the accessory glands. Right, so here we know that secretions of accessory glands plus the sperms is what we call as semen. Yes, so what is eventually ejaculated out of the body that is there is the semen. Ma'am, what is epididymis? Epididymis is a part of the body, right? It's a highly coiled structure which is located at the posterior part of the testis or the back side of the testis, wherein we see here that the sperms are stored briefly. And of course, from the urethra will enter into the male external genitalia, that is the penis, through which it is it's ejaculated out from the body, right? Now, Saurabh, if you are watching the session for the first time, right, because this is just a summary session, you might be struggling with it. So I would recommend that you watch Ankita ma'am's class, which is a detail on reproduction, and then you come and watch this, you will be able to understand, right? So this was all about the male reproductive system. Moving on to the female reproductive system. We see here that the main reproductive organ that is there. So here the main reproductive organ is the ovary, right? And in this case, if you see, right, we see that there are a pair of ovaries. And inside the ovaries, there are the female gamete, which is the ovum, or the plural one is called as the ova. Now, from here, we also see that from the ovary, there are these finger-like projections called as fimbriae, right? Oops. My diagram looks a little weird, so I'll just use this. So we see that there are these finger-like projections called as the fimbriae, and from there the fimbriae will move on to these tubular structures called as fallopian tube or the oviduct, right? Fallopian tube is also called as oviduct, okay? Now from here we know that there are a pair of fallopian tubes, right? So a pair of ovary, a pair of fallopian tubes, and they will come into this muscular pear-shaped organ which is called as uterus. It is known as the uterus, right? Now we see that from the uterus there's also a small canal-like structure called the cervix, eventually leading to this long elastic tube-like structure called as the vagina. Now the vagina is the opening, right? It's also what we see is that the vagina is the part of the female reproductive system that receives the sperms. Yes? So this is the main flow that you see, or the main parts of the female reproductive structure. What are fimbriae? Fimbriae that are there are these finger-like projections that are present close by to the ovary, right? So these are the structures that you need to know. Now we need to understand what exactly happens for a young offspring to be formed. Yes, so in this case we see that the sperms that are there are, entered, right? Or I would say that the sperms are ejaculated, and they will be ejaculated in, or they enter into the reproductive tract through the vagina, right? So from the vagina we see that the sperms that are there, they will swim upwards. So they swim through the cervix, then through the uterus, and then they will reach the fallopian tube. Now along the same time, if the ovary, right? So we see that if the ovary releases the egg, okay? So if an ovary releases the egg, and this process of release of egg from the ovary is what we call as ovulation. So if ovulation takes place, or if egg is released, right, from the ovary, we see that it will also swim into the fallopian tube. And in the fallopian tube, we see that the egg and we see that the sperm will fuse, right? So fusion takes place here. And there is fusion of male and female gamete, right? So this fusion of male and female gamete is what we call as fertilization. And this results in the formation of zygote. And where does this process take place? It takes place in the fallopian tube, right? So are we clear, everybody? Are we clear so far, or have we all gotten lost with what is happening? Yes, are we clear till whatever we have discussed so far? Give me a quick thumbs up. Very good. Okay, very simple concepts, and you need to know this, okay, where exactly fusion takes place. Yes? So this is what happens when fertilization takes place, right? And when will fertilization take place? Only when sperm enters into the female reproductive tract. But it is not always that happens, right? There are going to be times when there is no fertilization. So what will happen when there is no fertilization? So that is something that we need to take place. Where does fertilization take place? It takes place in the fallopian tube. Now, one thing to understand here, right, some other basics that we can quickly cover is that there are a pair of ovaries, or I will say two ovaries. Okay, so if you see inside the female reproductive tract, multiple sperms can be released. Millions of sperms are released. But every month, right, we see that every month one ovary, so it could either be the right ovary or the left ovary, will release one egg. Okay, so if this egg will be released from this ovary, next month this egg will release it. Okay, so it happens on a monthly basis. Now the thing is, there are fixed number of ovaries that are there, fixed number of eggs which are there inside the body, right? So what happens is that every month when the egg is released, the inner linings of the uterus will get thickened. Okay, so the inner lining of the uterus will get thickened with blood and mucus. Now, why does this happen? Why does the thickening take place? The thickening takes place so that if at all if the fertilization happens, then the developing embryo will get implanted here, and once it gets implanted here, we know that then the development takes place for the next 9 months where the baby will be formed, right? And we also know that at this point, once implantation takes place, there's formation of the disc-like structure called as placenta, which helps in providing all the necessary nutrients from mother to baby and baby to mother. Yes, so all of these things happen. But if fertilization does not happen, then we see that this will not take place, right? And we know that now all we are left with is an unfertilized egg. So there is an unfertilized egg and there is blood and mucus. So because fertilization has not taken place, all of this will be shed off. And this shedding, right? So shedding of blood, mucus and the unfertilized egg is what we call as menstruation, right? And we see that this particular process of menstruation takes place every month, and it's a cyclic process, which is why we call it as menstrual cycle. Okay, so very, very important things to remember. Now, of course, after this, we are going to move on to reproductive health, which is the last part, right? So in reproductive health, we know that the mother's health is extremely necessary in humans, because at the end of the day, the development of the baby takes place inside the mother's body. And at times, the pregnancy that is there could be risky, or at times we know that due to lack of family planning, it could cause diseases, which is why we see that there are contraceptives. So what is contraceptives and what is contraception? Now this is very, very important, because you will pakka get a question on your exam from this particular topic, right? So we need to understand what is contraception. So what is contraception? Contraception is nothing but the act of preventing pregnancy, right? So that is what we mean by contraception. And types of contraception includes barrier method. So barrier method is when there is a physical barrier that does not allow the sperm and egg to meet. And we know that barrier method mainly includes condoms, which can be used by males, and diaphragms, which can be used by females. Okay, very, very important to understand this. Now next up we have IUDs or intrauterine devices, and we see that IUDs or intrauterine devices are those which can be inserted into the body of the female in the uterus, and we know that things like copper T can be used, right, wherein the ions that are there will kill the sperms that might enter. Then we have hormonal method, where certain pills that have hormones in them can be ingested that might affect the hormonal balance of the body, which is why it can be good, but it's also not so great. It might be a little bad. Then of course we have surgical methods like tubectomy and vasectomy. So tubectomy is done in males and vasectomy is done in tubectomy is done in females and vasectomy is done in males, right? Wherein in the case of females, we see that in tubectomy in females, the fallopian tubes are cut and ligated, right? While on the other hand, right, in vasectomy, the sperm ducts are cut and they are ligated. So with this, of course, we come to the end of today's class. I know that it took you, we had quite a bit to cover. And Soumya, I know you must be an ardent lover of physics, but you know that at the end of the day, for your science exam, you must also know biology. So it's okay, learn some biology as well, okay? So everybody, very quickly, any doubt so far? We have quickly recalled, right? We have quickly recalled the whole chapter. And Harika, I have already done live process on the channel. You can check it out, yes? So I hope all of you have found this helpful. Ma'am, will cross-pollination take place in different flowers of species? See, different flowers in different plants, but if it is of same species, then it will be successful, okay? That is something, it will be successful. It can be that pollen grain will get transferred to some other flower of some other species, but pollen tube formation might not happen, okay? So that is what we mean by it. Ma'am, tissue culture, see, tissue culture, you don't have it so much in detail. So don't get worried about it, but basically you use the meristematic tissues or the growing parts of the plant, you put it in one nutrient media and then it will grow, right? So that is what we mean by it. Ma'am, regeneration definition please. So regeneration. So the regeneration that is there is nothing but a process wherein an organism will develop, or I can say that I mean, rather than writing it, I'll actually just dictate it out for you. So regeneration is a process by which an organism will either regrow a part of its body or its whole part of a body during unfavorable conditions. Difference between regeneration and fragmentation, right? So first and foremost, main thing to understand that in fragmentation, it happens as a process of reproduction. So this is a process of reproduction per se, and it's something that is commonly done. Like Spirogyra's body will undergo or break into fragments to grow into a new organism, right? Or to give rise to offsprings. Regeneration is not a mode of reproduction, right? And it can become a mode of reproduction only during unfavorable conditions. Yes? So during unfavorable conditions, we observe it. But this will happen whether conditions are favorable or non-favorable. Ma'am, what is grafting? See, grafting is when you take stem from one plant and you take another stem from another plant and you cut it like this, right? And you make one insert here. And then what you will do is you will bring these two together, okay? So now this will be inserted here, right? And you will tie them together. This is what you call as graft. So this is what you call as the stalk. This is what you call as the scion. Okay, ma'am, which is reversible, tubectomy or vasectomy? Vasectomy is reversible, not tubectomy. Ma'am, can you tell me about vegetative propagation using tuber? That is our potato. Potato is a tuber. That is what we call it. Ma'am, importance of DNA copying in reproduction. 2 points to remember. One thing is, why is DNA copying important? Because at the end of the day, all the genetic information regarding the survival of the organism is there in the DNA. So a copy of the DNA must be made. Otherwise, if the DNA goes from parent to offspring, parent will not be able to survive. So copies are essential to make more of themselves, right? And of course, at times during DNA copying, some errors might take place. And these errors can give rise to new characteristics or new variations. Yes? Okay. Ma'am, what is cervix? Cervix is also often called as the small part which starts to dilate during birth. Okay. Ma'am, double fertilization explain kar dijiye. Okay. Double fertilization that is there, right? Double fertilization that is there is seen in plants. Okay. Now what happens in pollen grains? We see that there are 2 gametes. Okay. And in the egg cell we see that there are many cells. Okay. But we only need to be concerned with 2. One is this part which is called as the central cell, and this is called as the egg cell. Yes. Now what happens is that 2 are here, 2 are here. Now one will go and fuse with the egg cell. This will result in the formation of zygote, right? The other one will go and fuse with the central cell, resulting in the formation of pen. So fusion happens twice, which is why it is called as double fertilization. Dhanashri, I have done a session on that. You can check that video out, okay, on important diagrams for biology. Anything else? PYQs of life process are done. Important questions will be done today. Layering. Layering is when you take a part of the stem, you layer it. Okay. So if this is the soil, you put a part of it underground and then you tie this part to like a rope, like a stick or something. This will then eventually start growing into a new organism. Functions of placenta. Placenta ka functions helps in transfer of oxygen from mother to baby, helps in transfer of nutrients from mother to baby, collects waste material from baby to mother. Are we clear? Variations are slight differences. Okay, they are slight differences that exist between organisms. Heredity ka class soon. Ma'am, different methods of contraception, barrier method, hormonal method, we have surgical methods and intrauterine devices. Okay, those are the 4 methods. Yes, what else everyone? Any more doubts? I hope most of you are clear with this. Now here's a quick homework question for all of you because we are running short of time, bachas. And guys, in case if you still have doubts, no, don't worry. Ankita ma'am is coming live today anyway at 7 p.m. She will, do not miss that question. I mean, do not miss that session because as you know, that session will be very important. So all your doubts will be clarified, okay? Will all of you make sure that you attend the 7 p.m. class? It will definitely be helpful, okay? So here's a quick homework question. Describe the various methods of contraception. Okay, this is your homework question and I need you to let me know in the comment section below. So let me know what are the various methods of contraception. And everybody, with this I'll be winding up because as you know, our time is almost up. But everyone, do not forget to try out the spoken English classes. They are going to definitely be helpful for all of you. And you know that we've got you covered no matter what because we are always making sure that important playlists are there for you. We're making sure that all the playlists are consolidated. The smart playlist is available for all the 10th graders for best preparation with one-shot NCRT. You will have your exercise questions. Everything is there. So everyone, do not forget to like this video, share this video with your friends and stay subscribed. And I will see you all very soon again. Up until then, bye everybody. Take care and lots of love.